the trouble?
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News. Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, it's Saturday night and this is the Saturday Five. I'm Darren Grimes along with Albie Amoncona, Emily Carver, Benjamin Butterworth and losing his GB News virginity, Alex Armstrong. Tonight on the show, the establishment got their men, Boris and Trump.
Annecy attacks.
It's 8 o'clock and this is the Saturday Five. For the next hour, you can kick the football into touch. There'll be no need for a substitute with this panel, but I may need to issue a few red cards if the tackles get too spicy. Every week, join Albie, Emily, Benjamin and myself along with a guest star. But for now, though, it's the news with Aaron Armstrong.
Hello, it's a minute past 8. Very good evening to you here from the GB newsroom. The Prime Minister is facing a further challenge to his leadership after a second ally of Boris Johnson has resigned. Nigel Adams, who is the MP for Selby and Ainsty in North Yorkshire, has stood down with immediate effect, triggering a third by-election in 24 hours. His decision follows that of Boris Johnson and Nadine Dorries yesterday. And that has led to calls for a general election. The committee investigating whether the former Prime Minister misled Parliament has promised to publish its report promptly. Shadow Deputy Leader Angela Rayner says it's clear Johnson did.
Boris Johnson has shown himself to be a coward once more. You know, he's not held his hands up to and taken responsibility as he should do. The Privileges Committee, a well-respected committee that are made up majority of Tory MPs, and he's just tried to trash them and say, I've got no responsibility, I've done nothing wrong. He's a man that can never hold his hands up to what he's done, and I think he's an absolute disgrace. And, you know, good riddance. He shouldn't have been in Parliament in the first place.
A 16-year-old boy has been charged with 2 counts of attempted murder and 1 count of GBH after an attack at a private school in Devon. Police were called to Blundell School in Tiverton around 1 a.m. yesterday morning. Say 3 people, including 2 students, sustained multiple serious injuries. 1 boy is in a critical condition. The other is said to be serious but stable. A second man's been arrested in connection with the disappearance of a woman in County Antrim. The 21-year-old Chloe Mitchell was last seen in Ballymena a week ago. Around 80 volunteers with the Community Rescue Service were involved in a major search of the area. Teams have been concentrating on the banks of the River Braid. A 34-year-old is being questioned after a 26-year-old man was arrested in Lurgan on Thursday. Italian authorities have released a video of a Turkish ship hijacked by armed illegal migrants trying to reach Europe. The Italian Special Forces stormed this vessel yesterday and regained control of the ship after nearly 7 hours, detaining 15 people. The 22 members of the crew have been released. None were seriously injured. And let's come to the football in a moment. Prosecutors say a British girl stabbed in the French Alps will be able to leave hospital in the next few days. The 3-year-old was on holiday with her parents when she and 3 other children were attacked at a park in the town of Annecy on Thursday. 2 pensioners were also injured. The victims are no longer in a critical condition. A 31-year-old Syrian refugee facing attempted murder charges has been remanded in custody. And the Champions League final is underway in Istanbul, with Manchester City hoping to complete an historic treble. These expectant City supporters in a fan park in Manchester, now they're hoping their team can beat Inter Milan to add the European trophy to the FA Cup and the Premier League title. If they win, City will become just the second English team to complete the League, Cup and European treble. The score, with just 4 minutes on the clock, is 0-0. We'll keep you up to date with that throughout the evening. Now, it's back to the Saturday Five.
This is the Saturday Five. Welcome to the Saturday Five. So to kick things off this evening, we're going to go straight into grime time. Now, few things are guaranteed in life: death, taxes, and Darren Grimes banging on about Brexit. Away you go, Darren.
Well, ladies and gents, if I can still call you that these days, listen closely and you'll hear the triumphant clinking of champagne flutes and the popping of corks in both Britain and the United States of America. In 2016, I proudly introduced Boris Johnson in Newcastle as he launched the Vote Leave campaign. The room erupted in a standing ovation for this blonde old Etonian, defying, of course, Tory stereotypes and actually capturing the audience's heart as well. Boris became the face of a popular movement for change. You see, finally our voices were being heard, but we were met with disdain. Deplorables, thick, racist, ignorant, they all said. And I'll forever be grateful to Boris Johnson for standing up for people like my own family against such bile. But fairness and impartiality seem to elude our opponents. A Privileges Committee chaired by the anti-Brexit Harriet Harman now judges Boris, a man she'd already declared guilty for eating cake out of Tupperware or something to that effect. It's a blatant attempt to destroy him for daring to offer Britain an alternative. And remember Sue Gray's report? Well, she's jumped ship from our supposedly impartial upper echelons of the civil service to join Sir Keir Starmer's Labour Party. How can we now rely on the blob's findings by this red under the bed? Shame on Rishi Sunak's Tory party for not calling out this bureaucratic coup. The same playbook unfolded in America, also in 2016, where President Trump, the embodiment of a movement that challenged the liberal elite, now faces threats of jail time. And let's not forget that previous presidents, including Biden, who's probably forgotten where he left them, frankly, kept hold of classified documents when he was in office as well as vice president. Now, Boris and Trump rattled the establishment to their core, giving them a punch on the nose that they won't forget. So fairness and rules be damned. The elites want them obliterated to remind us plebs of our place. That popular uprising, our demands to be heard and respected, that's the real loser in all of this. But we won't be silenced. We won't let the establishment revel in their triumph. Our voices matter. They've got their men, but they ain't got us.
Ooh.
Now, let's see what everyone thinks about that. We're having a few tech issues tonight, I think it's safe to say, but I think we have got all of us here in this wide shot. Albie, I'm going to come to you. You're not exactly, I think it's safe to say, a glowing fan of Boris Johnson, but you can surely accept Brexit, right? That wouldn't have happened without Boris.
I supported Brexit. I supported Boris. I campaigned for Boris in the general election in 2019. I backed his policies. I wanted him to succeed. But he did not succeed. He had an 80-seat majority, a historic opportunity to change his country, and he completely squandered it. Now, I think it's a shame the way that he's gone, but I just sometimes think, whatever happened to personal responsibility, you seem to be blaming everyone but Boris Johnson for what has happened to him. And from where I'm sitting, he behaved in a way which was unbecoming of a Prime Minister, got a fixed penalty notice for COVID rules which were stupid that he broke himself, and now is suffering as a result of that.
Yes, but I just view this as a political giant being undone by a parliament of pygmies.
By his own actions is what he was undone by.
No, by a parliament of pygmies, that's what this is. They've hated him ever since he got Brexit done. That's what this is about, isn't it, Benjamin?
I mean, look, you say a lot of stupid things, but calling Boris Johnson a political giant...
He is.
You know, the bloke couldn't even get his laws passed when he had an 80 majority.
Exactly.
He is the most hopeless Prime Minister that this country has had. And the truth is, I think that diatribe you just delivered to camera there, I think that shows that you have no principles, because it boils down to the idea that because you agree with his politics, and that's fine, that means you should excuse behaviour that is unacceptable. It is clear to any fool that he lied about the COVID rules. And the truth is, you're entitled to think the COVID rules were wrong, but he introduced them, he didn't follow them. And now, you also mentioned Trump in your message. Trump took confidential, top-secret documents.
Biden.
Yeah, so did Biden and so did Mike Pence. And do you know what? When they were found, they handed them back and they said, fine, we've got better things to do. Donald Trump refuses to accept that. And do you know what? Yesterday, a recording was released of him saying he knew they were top secret and couldn't take them home. He is a liar. Why do you defend him?
Bill Clinton had 8 years' worth of recordings with foreign leaders that he actually refused to hand over himself. So if you want to talk about Donald Trump, right, you've got to go through a whole list of presidents before you can actually find someone that hasn't done what Donald Trump has actually done.
Boris and Trump
but you want to talk about principles. You want to talk about principles. The principle is really important here. If you want to accuse Boris Johnson of lying, Harriet Harman, the woman who, by the way, has found Boris guilty, if we're to believe that's what's going to come out of this report, shared an article on Boris by Alistair Campbell. You want to talk about lying? Look no further than your own party, Benjamin. You want to talk about lies? He took us into a war. Did Boris Johnson do that? Was he responsible for young men losing their lives?
Well, I mean, I forget exactly when Boris was and wasn't in Parliament, but the Tories voted for the Iraq War, which you're referring to. But, you know, the truth is...
On a bed of lies.
I tell you what you're lying about. What you're lying about, just like Boris is lying about, is this idea that it's some stitch-up conspiracy. A majority of that committee are Tory MPs. A majority of Parliament, obviously...
Let me just interrupt here, because I think there's some sense being spoken on all sides, and there's some nonsense too. And there's some nonsense too, Benjamin Butterworth. I think that there is some truth to what Boris Johnson said in his statement. I think there have been many, many people in the establishment, if you want to call it, who can't forgive him for Brexit. And we remember, people still support Boris Johnson. Some people do, although it is a diminishing number, admittedly. But some people do still support him because they think he was the only man who was able to get Brexit through. And yes, it wasn't perfect, but if you cast your mind back to then, no one wanted, everyone, well, the Lords was trying to get the result overturned, Keir Starmer was trying to get the result overturned, you had various lawyers trying to get the result overturned, and Boris did manage to get it through where Theresa May failed.
But are you
so that is why... I'm not defending him, but what I'm saying is that I do think there is truth to the fact that people could not stand the fact that Boris Johnson was the Prime Minister and they wanted to get rid of him.
He has also landed the largest majority in 20 years. Well, it delivered Brexit, which is exactly what the people of this country wanted. And I still think the public forgive Boris for what he's done. I don't believe...
He's less popular than Philip Schofield.
By polling of, 1,000 people, I don't think you hear the real voices of people from these crap polls. No, they're rubbish, aren't they? I mean, you can poll a very specific group of people and get the right answer. That's how numbers... People manufactured data all
and
the
I mean,
time.
the polls didn't get the 80-seat majority.
They
so
did, and they didn't. The polls also didn't get Brexit, and the polls also didn't get Trump. Let's just put that out there too. So you can't rely on polls for everything, and governments run themselves on polls way too often.
And way too much, yes.
Actually, would you like Harriet Harman to go back and start maybe doing a report on Keir Starmer having a curry in Durham, for example? Right? Is this what we're going to be? Are we just going to be a parliament of pygmies that roll through looking at everyone and what they did in Tupperware during the lockdown?
You must admit, though, it does annoy me, though, too, that in that statement that Boris put out, he ended it, or towards the end, wrote about all the things that he would have done differently and all the things that Rishi Sunak was doing badly. For example, the tax burden. Well, it was Boris Johnson who resided over that tax burden going up to record levels. So I do think that's nonsense. And then he was talking about how he would have made the best of Brexit and how he would have got a US trade deal. We don't know if he'd ever be able to do that. You know, it's very easy to shout from the sidelines, and it's very obvious that he has a huge amount of resentment towards Rishi Sunak.
But I tell you what, though, and I actually think if Boris was still in office now, you would be seeing tax cuts because that's what he always wanted to do. No, I'm not. That's what he always wanted to do.
There's evidence to the contrary, because Boris Johnson was the Prime Minister, with as Albie mentioned, with an 80-seat majority.
Yes, during lockdown.
Which, by the way, is really not that much compared to what Tony Blair got. It's less than a third, for God's sake. He put your taxes up. He didn't build homes. He introduced the COVID rules.
We're going to come back. Right, we're going to come back to Boris. We're going to come back to Boris. But honestly, I tell you what, I think it's absolutely clear to me that the reason that there is such virulent hatred of him is because of what he managed to achieve. And if you ask me, that's a pretty good thing.
Well, anyway, we're going to come back to Boris because it is the biggest story of the day, week, month even. But up next, it's Albie. He's going to give his take on the horrific knife attack we saw in Annecy, France this week. Albie, take it away.
The awful attacks in Annecy, France show us why a common-sense, firm but fair approach to asylum seeker processing is absolutely necessary. Now, I'm concerned that Home Office plans to stop the boats and cut the asylum seeker backlog could leave the UK open to Annecy-style attacks. The Home Office announced earlier on this week plans to allow asylum to be granted to up to 12,000 migrants from the top 6 countries where asylum seekers are accepted from, but without interview. Now, in my view, this would be a grave error. It is absolutely true that the majority of asylum seekers who come to Britain and France and the broader Western world are of no threat to us whatsoever. But it is also true that there are a minority of people who do seek to cause us harm, as we saw in Annecy earlier on this week, where a 31-year-old Syrian refugee who was granted asylum in Sweden, but rejected in France, went on a rampage attacking children and adults as they enjoyed an afternoon in the park. So the point is, we have got to keep the stringent and important checks that are in place, the security checks, the interviews, and actually we should be strengthening them where possible so that we can ensure the safety of the British people. We can't get rid of these checks just to speed up the processing process so Rishi Sunak can prove that he's delivered on one of his 5 pledges. We can't sacrifice the diligence that keeps the great British public safe for the sake of speeding up a process.
Albie talking common sense. Well, love to hear it.
I normally talk common sense, Emily, thank you.
Well, I'm not sure the last couple of episodes, I haven't been sure.
Well, but you agree with me this time?
I do agree with you. I think it's absolutely madness to have a policy of amnesty because we have seen that there are massive security risks. Of course there are. You have people crossing the channel. We don't know who they are. We don't know where they're from. A lot of the time documentation is left behind, so we have no idea really. And therefore there are the terrible prospect of potential harms, terror attacks, etc., etc. We've seen it in the UK. That awful stabbing at that park in Reading was unfortunately an asylum seeker. So to me, it's just common sense.
And it's not all asylum seekers, of course, but interestingly, Darren, do you know who was in favour of an asylum seeker amnesty?
Nigel Farage.
Boris Johnson. So your man that you were just defending was in favour of the policy that I'm against. What do you think about that?
I think Boris Johnson, I haven't ever said he's right about absolutely everything, have I? I haven't sat here and said everything that's ever come out of Boris Johnson's mouth is everything that I believe. So I don't know why you're getting on your high horse about that, Albie.
I'm always on my high horse.
But look, Sweden has become the rape capital of Europe, right? And if you look across to Canada recently, they've just had a teacher telling a Muslim kid that actually they have to get used to pride. Right? I think there's going to be a tension between accepting a lot of refugees who are primarily from Muslim countries and the pride, whackery and wokery that we all go on about today. I think leftists, like Benjamin, frankly, have to make their mind up because their argument is we need to be as diverse and tolerant and accepting as possible, whilst also saying, actually, they have to accept our views or it's our way or the highway. Because that tension in Canada is going to come here. You can damn well bet your bottom
But let me
dollar.
respond to that, because you just said, oh, how can we have these people from Muslim countries, very small C conservative countries, they might not settle in with things like our attitudes to LGBT people. And then in the next breath, you said, oh, I can't stand that whackery and wokery. Well, you sound a lot more like them. What a load of nonsense.
Well, I wasn't suggesting we prosecute gays, Benjamin, was I?
The truth is that, you know, this man, if I'm not mistaken, came to Sweden in 2013. So he had lived a third of his life in this part of the world. So I would question, you know, his actions are heinous and deplorable and he should not be allowed to stay in this part of the world. But I would argue that were they a reflection on his asylum status or a reflection on his mind and his life that led him to do something so deplorable?
He
left that part of the world 10 years ago.
And it is said he's a Christian. It is said he's a Christian, just
But
to be
this is a
absolutely
cultural
clear.
issue, isn't it? I think you got this right, Darren. We are ever heading towards this absolute insane woke mind virus that keeps on infecting millions more people every week by the way things are going. And you're getting massive pride parades now that are obviously very much against some people's religion and culture, and then we're just, rather than trying to get people to integrate in the country, we're just sort of going, hey, go on, get on with it.
But Alex, I agree with the integration, but can you seriously say that it is a cultural problem that someone has gone and attacked children at a playground? Are you seriously saying
I'm not
that
saying
in some
that.
cultures
No, but what
we're heading to this loggerheads where it seems that those two things are not compatible.
I think what is a conflict, and I'm not saying that is cultural, but obviously a lot of these men who are crossing over are coming from war zones or from places where there is terrorism as a norm. So it's hardly surprising then that in a certain number of cases, some of these men will have come from distress, trauma, etc., will know of terrorism as an everyday thing that happens, and of course they won't be ready to immediately slot into British way of life.
But of course the point of the asylum seeker process is to grant asylum to people who are coming from very dire situations, indeed, like the situations that you explained. My question is whether or not, Benjamin, it is prudent that we remove some of the security checks that might prevent some of this stuff from happening, just to speed up the asylum seeker backlog process.
Well, I'd say two things. One, on Emily's point, this ugly stereotype that in some people's cases I think boils down to racism, where basically they think, oh, Muslims, oh, they must all be terrorists coming over here. Muslims are far more likely...
I've never said that. I never said that. I just said that in some countries where some of these men are coming from, terrorism is a daily fact. And that will impact some people's way of living, as we have seen with these cases. And that is why we need to make sure that we have security checks. That's all I'm saying.
But these people coming from those countries are far more likely to be victims of terrorism than
Of course, but we need to check.
Victims of terrorism
we
than
need to
any of
check,
us in this
Benjamin.
room.
But we need to check.
Should there be
the point
checks
I would make,
or not?
when you talk about the checks, is that I would actually question how thorough or how useful those checks are. I mean, the nature of someone coming off a boat is you're basically trusting their answers. They often have no documentation. They can't check what they did in some village in Syria that had some horrendous attack, right? And so I think this is actually quite a pragmatic thing for the government to say, well, we know that the vast majority of these people are going to be approved. Let's try and get the numbers down because it's costing us a fortune.
Well, there's also a bigger problem here, is that people do not feel that the multicultural society is working, and I do genuinely believe a lot of people feel that that's broken.
Well, I'm sure people at home will agree with that one, but we have to finish on that one right now. But still to come tonight, Benjamin is going to tell us how the demise of Boris Johnson is long overdue, and I'll be talking about Sir Keir Starmer's love for U-turns. No, I won't. Actually, yes, I will. You're with the Saturday 5, live on GB News.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway...
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Deebs & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners on TV, radio and online. This is GB News. Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Saturday 5. As usual, you have all been sending in your emails. Richard says, this successful witch hunt is the first stage completed in the grand plan of Brexit reversal by the intolerant left. Yes, I can see Benjamin Butterworth chomping at the bit. Claire says, Parliament did not want Brexit, but the people did, and Boris did what the people wanted, and Parliament hate him for it. Couldn't agree more. Keep your comments coming in. Now, though, it's time for Emily, and she reckons you can't trust a thing Sir Slippery Starmer says. It's time for the Carver Palaver.
It is. So, Keir Starmer is doing so many U-turns, he started going round in circles. So, let's remind ourselves of some of the pledges he's unceremoniously dropped. Renationalising rail, mail and energy, gone. Increasing income tax for the top 5%, nope. Scrapping tuition fees, you can forget that one. Defending free movement, turns out Keir didn't mean that one either. And now the big one. Remember how Rachel Reeves said she'd be Britain's first Green Chancellor? Turns out it's a bit expensive to be green these days. She's waived her flagship £28 billion a year commitment to investing in all things green and replaced it with a weak-worded aspiration to at some point hit that figure maybe. Rachel seems to have realised that what was her economic master plan only days ago is now, in her own words, Reckless. My word, could this be an acknowledgement from the Labour Party that net zero policies might be a tad unaffordable? Or is the climate emergency suddenly not so much of an emergency? Rachel Reeves wants Labour to be trusted on the public finances, apparently. Tell that to the 2 in 5 business owners in the UK reportedly planning to sell up or wind down their business before Labour get into power. So, while the Tory party continues to navel-gaze, it looks like the Labour Party are suffering a few difficulties themselves. If this is a taste of what's to come if Labour get the keys to number 10, we better get ready for whiplash. There we go, whiplash.
Yeah, I mean, they've told us they're going to be more green than Kermit the Frog, but actually, you know, it's looking pretty doubtful right now.
I mean, I find this preposterous from a Tory who supported Liz Truss, the only Prime Minister...
I didn't actually support Liz Truss. I didn't actually. I'm going to fact-check you there. I didn't support Liz Truss.
And let me fact-check you back. Where on earth is this statistic that 2 in 5 businesses in Britain plan to close if there's a Labour government?
Well, I know you've been off swanning around the world for 3 weeks, but maybe if you read the newspapers, you would have seen that a very, very, very large survey, which you trust, has spoken to lots of business owners around the country. I mean, you said you love surveys, so this survey tells us that a lot of business owners are terribly worried that Labour is just going to decide to raid their businesses with extra taxes.
I think he's asking which survey.
Well, it's in the Times today.
Well,
Have a
I look
look.
forward to reading it because I find it very hard to believe. Because the truth is...
Why do you find that hard to believe? We don't know whether the Labour Party wants to tax everyone to high heaven or whether it's not. Well, you have Angela Rayner saying tax, tax, tax. You have Rachel Reeves saying we need to be fiscally prudent. Which one is it? What do you want?
Well,
what is Labour?
Let's go on facts, Emily, seeing as you finally seem to be on board with the idea. When we had a Labour government, taxes were lower, incomes were higher, economic growth was higher. All of those things were better than at any point under the last 13 years when Tony Blair was Prime Minister. And the truth is that when you...
You mean until the Labour Party ran out of money?
The truth is that when you talk about...
And crippled the economy.
Like Rachel Reeves' £28 billion a year on climate change, it would be stupid for this country to not lead the way on that. Not only because, and you mentioned I've been in the...
Well, then you must be very angry with Rachel.
I've been in the Himalayas the past couple of weeks where you see the effects of climate change are disastrous. 2 billion people are having their water security threatened because those Himalayan mountains...
Well, I hope you paid for your carbon to be counteracted or whatever they call it, offset.
I travelled around the country by bus, so I think that's pretty selfless of me. But the reason
I like
that is that one of the
Did you get there on a bus as well?
One of the great things about this country is that we have an exceptional higher education sector. We lead the world in the quality of our science and our research and our entrepreneurship for inventing all sorts of things. And so I think it is incredibly wise when Labour says that we should put a lot of money into developing green solutions because we can sell those round the world.
You must be disappointed, then, that they are no longer doing that. You must be disappointed that he scrapped the pledge to stop tuition fees. You must be disappointed that he doesn't want free movement of people to happen anymore. You must be disappointed about these U-turns, surely.
Because I think you should have tuition fees because I think the people that benefit should contribute to the cost.
Are you disappointed about the U-turns?
And actually, I think the reason that you're all so riled up is you can see, whether you admit it or not, that Keir Starmer is where the people of this country are. He is moderate.
No, hang on. One of the other things that's happened while you've been away is that Keir Starmer's got in a bit of trouble with some of the trade unions, who are some of his buddies, with this stop new oil and gas. The trade unions aren't so happy. Why? Because they're worried that it will destroy thousands of jobs. So Keir Starmer has a bit of a tricky job on his hands, doesn't he, Alex?
He does.
He doesn't know who he's appealing to, the Red Wall or the Liberal Metropolitan Islington types.
And correct me if I'm wrong, Emily, but I'm pretty sure the Labour Party got a donation from Just Stop Oil.
One of the donors.
One of the
Just Stop
donors.
Oil.
I mean,
Vance.
look, I think you nailed it with Kermit the Frog. It's the Muppet Show over there.
Well, actually, I think right now it's the Kama Sutra, right? There are more positions than the Kama Sutra. That's what it's starting to look like. And whichever position they actually choose, Benjamin claps like an adoring seal.
We'll become under Keir Starmer, we'll become an unserious nation like Germany, and they've just scrapped their last nuclear power plant, despite having these crazy net zero goals. What's going on?
I just think it is quite remarkable for a politician like Rachel Reeves to have this flagship policy that she says is amazing. It's like the Green New Deal, like Biden and etc., and now it's reckless overnight.
Do you think, Emily, that as Conservatives maybe we need to get a bit better at politicking? Labour is just politicking. They're saying one thing and then they change their minds as soon as the wind blows in a different direction. And actually, they're outperforming the Conservatives in the polls much as I hate to admit that. So why is it that we're letting Labour play politics better than we are?
Well, I'm not sure about that one, but still to come tonight, our guest star presenter, Alex Armstrong, will tell us why Ramonas are wrong to talk down Britain, when, in fact, it's the Eurozone that's the one in recession.
Absolutely, and Benjamin is championing at the bit there to gloat about Boris Johnson's resignation. You're with the Saturday 5, live on GB News.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nana, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Welcome back to the Saturday 5. Thank you very much for sending in your emails. In reaction to Albie's argument, Bridget has to say, I grew up in London during the war, as did many my age. We grew up with the bombings and other threats, but it didn't turn us into murderers. Neither did our troops that fought in terrible conditions or those who were taken prisoners of war. Well, there you go. Some people are just absolute maniacs and wrong-uns. So, moving on, it is time for our next debate. Alex Armstrong is making his debut on the show. Go for it.
Well, people like Benjamin Butterworth and his Remainer cabal online have been very quiet the last few days as the Eurozone has slipped into recession. Now, if you've been online or on Twitter the last few years, those same Ramonas have been telling you that the UK is finished, that it's all going to be over. Brexit has ruined this country. There will be drug shortages, food shortages, riots on the streets. But let's look at the facts, shall we? The UK is growing and the EU is shrinking. So I don't know about you guys, but I'm sick to death of people online who just want to take down Britain at every opportunity they get. Any smidgen of bad news, they will absolutely amplify it. I don't know what you think, but I am at my wit's end with it.
Wow.
Oh, completely agree.
I am too.
I mean, Alex, you don't need me to do this country down. The people you voted for have done that enough. So tell me, you said that this country is growing. How much is it growing by?
Look, I'm not saying that the country is growing by a spectacular amount.
Call me
but we're
back,
clearly
but an
doing
answer would be nice, Alex.
The answer is this. The answer is this.
What is it?
Are we doing better than our neighbours in Germany? What's the answer to that?
And what's the figure?
Yes, we are. Yes, we are.
I know you've been away on holiday for 3 weeks,
But you don't want to answer it because you know that your argument falls apart.
Listen, I am not screaming and shouting about the government's economic policies here.
Well,
however, they are a damn sight better than what's going on over with our neighbours over the water.
The growth rate that you hail as such a victory of this government and Brexit, it's 0.1%. And the reason
0.1% better than what's going on in Europe.
The reason I say to Darren that we are not doing better is because we are the only G7 country that has not returned to the size we were before COVID. So it is obviously not great that Germany has gone into recession.
Benjamin.
But those countries and the Eurozone grew much more than we did.
Benjamin, why are you so happy?
Would you rather we grow or have absolutely negative growth? What would you prefer?
Alex, I believe in growth. That's why I don't vote for the Tories.
But we are growing, aren't we?
You know, I mean,
we are growing, aren't we? We are.
This is the arrogance.
Even if it's 0.1%, we are growing.
Arrogance that people like you think that you have a monopoly over the economic issues.
The City of London.
It took Liz Truss to crash the economy. It took the Tories to have the lowest growth that this country's had in generations.
Germany right now, I don't think Liz Truss was the First Minister or Prime Minister, whatever they call it in Germany. Chancellor, thank you, Albie, of Germany. Was she, Benjamin? Did they vote to leave the European Union? Because they're in recession. You're blaming everything on Liz Truss in this country right now. It clearly isn't. London, the City of London, has kept its crown as the top financial centre in Europe every single year since Brexit. You people told us that there would be people going out for the dinghies, not to get here over the English Channel, but to get out to France, to Paris, to Brussels. It hasn't happened.
You have to sit there and come up with ridiculous insults because you know there is no economic argument for Brexit.
If I can just make a very quick economic point, and it's actually about inflation. So, of course, it is a good thing, I suppose, that the UK is growing at 0.1% and the Eurozone is shrinking at 0.1%. You know, it's good that we're growing, I suppose, Alex. I'll give you that. But when we talk about inflation, historically we know that when we've seen levels of inflation above 5%, guess what is the only thing that has brought it down? Recession. So I don't necessarily look at the Eurozone being in recession as something which is bad, because it might actually bring down their rate of inflation.
May I just cut in there?
I don't agree that a recession is the only way to bring down inflation. I think you're teeing it up to say that's where we're headed, but there is and I actually think Liz Truss had the right idea. I really do. I actually think her policies on growth, on lowering taxes, getting the people spending, giving people back some money after a deep, deep recession through COVID was a good thing. And I think if we'd followed the path, actually, we may have been on the right track.
May I just say something? Because it's not just growth that we're actually doing a little bit better than the Eurozone in. Look at food inflation. Now, I have heard so many times, I've been on panels with people who cannot get over Brexit, and they say, they just say as fact that food inflation in this country is the highest in Europe. It absolutely isn't. There have been some stats that have come out this week that show that if you pop into a French supermarket, you are going to be paying a huge amount more for those basic essentials. You are going to be paying more in many other European countries too. So it really is not the case that Britain is the only place where inflation is spiralling.
Food inflation is higher in the UK than anywhere else.
No, it isn't.
But it is. But
no, it isn't.
Prices are highest in France and lowest in Germany, but the rate in which it's rising is higher here.
No, if you look at the stats, the prices have gone up basically the same. Germany is suffering the worst, I think, currently. I mean, we don't have the stats to hand right here, but it is demonstrably not the case that Britain is suffering the most economically out of the European countries.
Just nappies, for example. Just a basic product like nappies is £12 equivalent in France, and it's £6 here.
But, Alex, if recession brings down inflation, the inflation rate in the Eurozone, quicker than the rate of inflation here, would that not be a good outcome for the Eurozone?
Well, for the Eurozone, I'm sure, but if we're talking about the UK specifically, I don't, again, we'll repeat, I don't think a recession is the right way out of reducing inflation.
I'm not saying it's the right way, I'm just saying if we look historically, inflation over 5%, the only thing that's brought it down is a recession.
But it's a hypothetical. The point of this conversation is to point out that there are people living in this country who like nothing more than to read negative news about this country so they can link it back to Brexit and say, I told you so. The reason why everything is rubbish in this country is because of Brexit. And that is demonstrably not true. Yes, Brexit has added some trade barriers to some trade, but that is not to say that Europe is taking over and is suddenly the land of milk and honey. It is not the case.
Are we growing? Is the UK growing? Just say yes or no.
Well, no, because actually...
Well, yes.
The point I was going to make is that there's actually a problem with these arguments more generally, which is that we have an obsession over this GDP figure, right? And and the idea that that is the best indication of whether people's lives are improving, I think is becoming increasingly misleading.
Sound like David Cameron.
So, you know, the fact is that the kind of average income that a British family has been stagnating in a way that many other countries, whether they're related to the Eurozone or any other country. So, for example, in 2007, we had the highest household incomes of the G7. Today, we have the lowest. We have a problem with talented people, doctors, one fine example, going to Australia, where they have something like $15,000 higher average.
That's absolutely true.
Emily's point.
That's absolutely true.
There are people like yourself, Benjamin, who will do nothing but put the UK down. That's what we want to talk about. You can't say, do you know what, actually the UK
I agree with you. We should be talking about GDP per capita because the government tries to fiddle with the statistics by, I don't know, having mass immigration, for example, and then they can say how our economy's grown so much, but actually per capita, do you feel better off? No. Anyway, still ahead. Benjamin, he's delighted Boris Johnson has resigned as an MP. In fact, he's wondering why it's taken so long. You're with the Saturday 5 live on GB News. Stay tuned.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things. We've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prisons?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed. So I guess they've always been quite woke. That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
On Mark Dolan tonight in My Big Opinion, my reflections on Boris Johnson's departure. A talented but flawed character, his report card is a mixed one. So overall, is it a thumbs up or thumbs down? Find out at 9. In my take at 10, you don't have to wait for the judge. I'll be giving my verdict on Prince Harry's needless war against the British press. Does Donald Trump really face 100 years in jail? I'll be asking tonight's newsmaker Kinsey Schofield, live from the United States. TV star Kim Woodburn will be giving her forthright views on Holly Willoughby's return to the This Morning sofa. And let me tell you, sparks will fly. We're live from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back to the Saturday 5. Thank you very much for sending in your emails. In reaction to my Carver Palaver earlier, Richard has said, do you think the race to an unfunded, unaffordable green utopia is a good thing? Keir Starmer does. Well, there you go.
Yes, and reacting to Alex's attack, Helen said, great comments from Alex praising the UK. Couldn't agree more. And then Sally says, I've watched GB News since day one and have told all my friends to watch it. It's fantastic. Keep up the incredible work. £5 in the post. Now, it's time for our final debate, and it's Benjamin, unfortunately, who's going to spend the next few minutes gloating about Boris Johnson's political downfall. Away you go, Benjamin.
OK, deep breath. First of all, are you OK? I know it's strange to not have him sat here in Parliament. No, I'm not talking about Philip Schofield. I'm talking about the other philandering hypocrite who cheated on his wife and kids. Yes, that's right, Boris Johnson. The man has been exposed as a liar once again. He was given the results, as you'll all know by now, of Parliament's investigation into whether he misled the Commons over claims of his partying and breaking the COVID rules he introduced. And that committee, which is a Tory majority, appears, from what we know, to have found that he was guilty of lying. Now, this shouldn't be much of a surprise. According to a poll this week, more than 80% of the British public think he's a liar. But, like a lot of men who don't want to own up to their mistakes, he has decided to run away. Instead of fighting these claims, which he says are a conspiracy and a fix and are Labour's Harriet Harman trying to get at him, he shows that classic sign of honesty and has quit and run away. Now, I think we've known for a long time that Boris Johnson is a liar. He's a man that said he was a libertarian but introduced the highest taxes you've ever got. And now it's coming home to roost. The truth is, the only reason he quit Parliament yesterday is because he wants to get his excuses in early, before it reveals that while you put up with COVID rules, while you sacrificed for loved ones, while you sacrificed even if you hated the COVID rules, he was partying and lying. It's not Harriet Harman and the Privileges Committee that is the author of his demise. It's Boris Johnson. So good riddance, Boris.
It's really interesting, actually, that you mimicked Holly Willoughby at the start there, because that was false, fake and full of holes. I mean, the idea that Boris Johnson was partying in number 10, like there was a sort of a disco ball put up in the main room and he was dancing around with Carrie going round a pole or something like that, is just ludicrous.
But the thing is, you've got to see it from Benjamin's point of view, because I remember back in the dark COVID days, Benjamin was one of those people who never, ever, ever broke the rules, even the most tiniest of bits. He was chained to his sofa in his apartment, never saw anyone at all. So it's clear that Benjamin...
You're saying that with a tone of sarcasm.
But I think you were even doing more than the rules required you. You were the teacher's pet, Benjamin.
Let me just quickly answer that. You know, I did follow the rules. And actually, you know, and I agreed with the rules as well. Now, there'll be people on this panel, and I suspect lots of people at home, who didn't agree with the rules. But I tell you what, they did follow them. OK, this country was very compliant, remarkably so. We know from what politicians have said, far more so than they expected. And that's why it matters. He lies and lies again. What was it? A great thinker, I forget her name, said, when someone shows you who they are, believe them. Don't you agree?
You have such a stellar career in acting, I must say. You should go into it.
Emily, I'm sorry, but I don't like the way that you're all ganging up on Benjamin on this issue.
Thank you.
I think it's time that actually Conservatives moved on from Boris Johnson and stopped defending him, because it's ruining the entire idea of conservatism in Britain. The idea, Alex, you're shaking your head, that Boris Johnson was some tax-cutting, regulation-burning Conservative is for the birds. Taxes rose under Boris Johnson. The EU retained law bill didn't get passed through Parliament. What did he actually achieve in Parliament that was in line with the Conservative agenda that you want, and that I want?
Albie, listen, I am not Boris Johnson's biggest supporter. I'll make that clear.
So why didn't you criticise him today?
I absolutely did, and I'm not saying that Boris is an angel. However, if we take this back to what the public really, really want to talk about is this a witch hunt on Boris?
The public doesn't think that.
Hang on. I think they do, actually.
He's less popular than Philip Schofield.
His popularity ratings
He's little
are
more
totally
popular than
irrelevant.
Prince Andrew, for God's sake.
Should this have cost him his job, the most successful, biggest majority mandate in the last 20 years or so, the guy is dethroned by this witch hunt?
You can think he was a shoddy Prime Minister and also think that there is a little bit of an element of a witch hunt about it.
I don't
about
feel
his
that there's
demise.
been a witch hunt
No,
against
I
Boris
think
Johnson.
there has been a little bit. I think there has been a little bit of that.
That committee
if you
is
think
made
of the
up
Privileges
Boris
Committee,
haters to the max. It's like going to court and.
But Alex, the sanction then would have been voted on by Parliament, where there's a Conservative majority, and then if he was going to lose his seat, there would have had to have been a recall petition of his constituents.
The Prime Minister doesn't
which
want
he
Boris
decided
around
he
at all.
wouldn't have won.
Of course, Rishi won't want Boris around.
So there were three other points at which Boris could have gone to either the people in his constituency or gone to the Conservative Party, and he came to the conclusion that no one would have supported him. Why do you support him?
I'm pretty sure he would have got those final few votes and stood against Rishi, but he did what was best for the party and stepped aside. So actually, I do think Boris would have come back, because I think
to be honest,
the Tory party would have voted him back in.
I think you're right, Albie, that the Conservative Party does need to move on. And I do think a large section of the population, a vast majority, have already moved on and don't want to be constantly talking about Boris Johnson anymore. But I do think we can talk about whether there is bias in the Privileges Committee as a separate issue and also intertwined with this. I don't think that means you're a conspiracy theorist or that you're the biggest Boris fan ever in the world. You can be interested in both of those things. Do you see what I mean?
I see what you mean. My point has always been that I think we need to move on from Boris Johnson. I think this is the third time that I've made that point in this hour that we've been talking. And I think it's just time to get on with it. Rishi's the Prime Minister. He's going to lead us into the election. Let's get behind him. Stop resigning MPs.
All right, sadly, we are going to have to leave it there so Benjamin Butterworth doesn't get to come back. You'll all be delighted to know. But it's been a fantastically spicy show. Thank you to this wonderful panel. Victor says, looks like the thin air in Kathmandu has affected Benjamin's brain. But anyway, next up is the brilliant Mark Dolan. Cheers very much. See you next week.
Good evening, I'm Jonathan Vautry here with your latest GB News weather forecast from the Met Office. Saturday marks the first day since the end of August last year that temperatures rose above 30 degrees Celsius in the UK. We are feeding in this heat from southern southwestern areas of Europe, and it's going to remain quite hot as we move into Sunday as well. Combine that with these occluded fronts helping to pep up showers with outbreaks of rain, moisture and heat means humidity, and it will feel quite sticky for some of us as we head into the overnight period. The showers tending to move northwards into parts of Scotland. They could be heavy in places, generally drier throughout the early hours of Sunday morning for Northern Ireland, Wales and England. But temperatures holding up around the mid to high teens, making it slightly uncomfortable for sleeping in places, and means it will start off on a warm note on Sunday morning as well. The showers across Scotland will continue to push their way northwards, but into the afternoon, once that sunshine develops, we'll see further showers poking off around western areas of England into Wales, across southern parts as well. These could bring some torrential downpours, 30 to 40 millimetres of rain in an hour, and temperatures once again climbing towards that 30 Celsius mark, more towards eastern areas of England now. It will take a little bit of time for those showers to clear their way off. Could still be thundery into the evening time at least, and some localised flooding is possible. They'll tend to die out a bit more as we head into the overnight period, and some clear spells will develop, but could be quite misty and foggy around some coastal areas as well. Another muggy night leads into Monday, and once again it will be a bright and sunny start for many of us, but that sunshine will help to develop those showers, and we'll see them again potentially thundery in places throughout the day. Whilst we'll see further showers on Monday, this area of high pressure is going to start pushing its way in from Scandinavia and settle things down for the middle part of the week. So showers tending to ease their way off, and we'll see more dry conditions and prolonged amounts of sunshine, and temperatures still going to be remaining very warm.
First and foremost, I'm a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing. We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News. Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's 9 o'clock on television, on radio and online in the United Kingdom and across the world. This is Mark Dolan Tonight. Coming up in My Big Opinion, my reflections on Boris Johnson's departure. A talented but flawed character, his report card is a mixed one. So, overall, is it a thumbs up or a thumbs down? Find out shortly. My Mark Meets guest is the international best-selling author of a new self-help book that says you can do 20% of the work and achieve 80% of the results. What's not to like? It's the book everyone's talking about, and it might just change your life. Find out why before the end of the hour. In My Take at 10, you don't have to wait for the judge. I'll be giving my verdict on Prince Harry's needless war against the British press, and I won't be pulling my punches. He's going down.
Plus, the Queen of Clean, Kim Woodburn, will tell us if Brits really need heat alerts from the government. And it's Saturday night, so that means the brilliant Kinsey Schofield live from LA. Is Donald Trump really facing 100 years in prison? You heard me right. Lots to get through. It's been a hot day, so please get loads of beers in the fridge, and I'll see you after the headlines with Aaron Armstrong.
Good evening to you. It's a minute past 9, Aaron Armstrong here in the GB newsroom. The Prime Minister is facing calls for a general election following the announcement of a third Tory resignation. Nigel Adams, the MP for Selby and Ainsty, says he's standing down with immediate effect, triggering a third by-election in 24 hours. Boris Johnson announced his resignation yesterday after seeing in advance a report from the committee investigating whether he misled Parliament. The ex-Culture Secretary Nadine Dorries followed hours earlier. Shadow Deputy Leader Angela Rayner says it's time for Boris Johnson to take responsibility for his actions.
Privileges Committee, a well-respected committee that are made up majority of Tory MPs, and he's just tried to trash them and say, I've got no responsibility, I've done nothing wrong. He's a man that can never hold his hands up to what he's done, and I think it's an absolute disgrace, and, you know, good riddance. He shouldn't have been in Parliament in the first place.
Donald Trump's described his indictment as a witch hunt and a series of criminal charges against him as ridiculous and baseless. In his first public appearance since the charges were announced, Trump told the Republican North Carolina convention it amounts to election interference.